Hello everybody, let's get started. Alright, this video is going to be slightly different than my normal ones. A lot of people have noticed that I have a great love of creating settings and so forth and so on, writing, etc. But I no longer had the time for it, obviously. Like, before the YouTube thing took off, as I've said before, I was attempting to be a writer, so I was creating novels and things of that nature. Obviously, now, these days, have a slight background in animation. Before I was doing the animations even, I was also attempting to do comics, like webcomics. There was something called Gauged that I was doing for a while. That was the most serious venture I had into it, but after the YouTube thing took off, it got to where I just did not have the time for it, so I had to drop it. So, point being and all that, I have a lot of experience with building things like this, but I haven't really had the time to be able to focus on doing anything of that nature. So, what is this video about? Some of you may remember I did a video about a couple months ago that I called Scary Lessons. And it is about a... Actually, I'll get more into that in a second. But the gist of it is that I had an idea... Let's go back even further, actually. There was a cartoon called... There was a movie cartoon, Scooby-Doo and the Ghoul School, I think its name was. And on the comics and cartoon board of 4chan, and lots of other places for that matter, it's not just there. I think the Toon... I can't remember the name of the website, but there's another one that's, like, infamous for this sort of thing. Not important. But that has sort of a cult following in a way. But me, especially my caricature of Winnie, the werewolf, like, redesign of her, Hardy draws his version of Phantasma, and so forth and so on. Like, a lot of different characters have been reimagined from that original show, that original movie, into sort of online caricatures that are a bit more famous these days than the originals were in some ways. A bit more relevant these days anyways. So, those characters got to where they were so different from the originals. Like, I'm drawing Winnie essentially here, but if you look at the original Winnie design, it looks completely different from the original. She acts completely different. She's a completely different character, in other words. So to that end, her new name is Winry, I decided. But the gist of it is that we got so far with that I eventually decided, you know what? If I'm gonna do anything with these characters for fun, which this is what this is, I decided I'm just going to completely change everything. I'm going to give this its own setting. I'm going to give the characters their own personalities, their own new names if it's applicable. And after I had gotten through doing the thing that I was doing in October and mainly October, whenever I was going through looking for more obscure monsters from around the world to design into monster women, then after that I decided, you know what? Let's just run with this. Let's take all these ideas that we've been generating and actually build on top of it. Because this will be a good project. Like, it's not, I'm not doing like a major life-changing, I'm stopping YouTube entirely to focus on this dumb comic or anything like that. This is just a one-time thing, but it's something that I wanted to show. In this case, I wanted to demonstrate making a comic, specifically. And it's been a while since I've done this. It took me a while to get back into the mindset for it. And in the case of this video, what you're actually seeing right now is... This is like page... like 5 or page 4? I can't remember. No, it's page 5. It's page 5. This was a 6-page comic. And I wanted to go over a bit of the process of doing that and so forth and so on. A bit of the setting that I've kind of constructed for it. But the general gist of this is that I just had the idea of, you know what, I want to do something more story-driven, because I never get to do that anymore. I want to show how to build the setting and that sort of thing, and we'll just roll with this. Man, I worked on this one. It took me a while to get that picture of her right. I redraw it like 3 or 4 times. Alright, so I told you where the idea came from. Like, it very loosely came from the Ghoul School thing. That was made back in like the 1990s. But mainly just the fact that so many people have been working on the general idea behind it and coming up with their own interpretations and so forth and so on. Like, I think it might be Lynx, I can't remember, has his own sort of thing where it's more of a, probably more of a dark story where Winnie is like playing with the bone that used to belong to Phantasma or something like that. It's been a while since I've seen it, but that's one interpretation. I think Hernie's is more lewd, so no need to go too deep into that one. A lot of people misunderstand me in many respects. Like whenever I finally did release this, and it is out as of this recording, a lot of people were surprised by it because they didn't really expect it to be, heartfelt. But usually whenever I write, I write more seriously. Like, never everything I do is stupid for the sake of being stupid, although I do enjoy doing that sort of thing as well. You'll see more of that whenever we get to the very end, though. So, everyone was developing these ideas, and I decided to run with mine. That's the gist of it. So, after sitting down and sort of figuring out what sort of setting do I want, how do I want everything to function in the setting, which I'll go into a little bit later, I decided on this comic to sort of unite everything together. And so, the first thing that I did, the first thing you should do whenever you're making this sort of comic, which this is 6 pages, as said. A lot of people don't think of it this way. Like, each one of these pages probably took about 11 hours, I guess, total. Probably more than that, actually. Because when it comes down to it, a comic page is more than just one image you're working on. A comic page is, like, see, top panel, there's a panel, there's a panel, there's a panel. Like, it's individually probably, like, at least, like, 6 to maybe a dozen or even more individual images that you're having to draw, draft, color, ink, and so forth and so on. So, even though it's one page, it's actually a lot of different drawings. So, in total, I couldn't even begin to estimate how many individual drawings this composes, but it takes a long time. So, planning is very important when it comes to making a comic. Even if you're doing something as limited as a little 6-pager like this is. And like I said, it's been a while since I've done this, so I'm not really that used to it. So I'm sure someone that's actually more practiced at this can, bang these out way faster than I was doing. And I was doing a lot of things that were wrong in the first place. So if there's anyone that actually does this more professionally, don't get too upset about it. Like, I'm just trying to show this off to get people sort of introduced to the idea of doing it. Just to get them exposed to new information, which is what this comic is actually about. One of the first things I did was actually look up what the industry standard for prints is, because I was thinking ahead to that. It's like, well, what if I actually did make this into something that could be printed out one day? My first reaction, since I don't really take things too seriously, was, oh, who cares? I'm never going to do that. And I may not, but I decided, you know what, if I'm going to actually take this seriously and use it to demonstrate things like this, I need to actually do it. So to that end, I looked up what the industry standards for dimensions were in terms of like how you lay out the thing, what its dimensions need to be for like cropping the image and so forth and so on. And the dimensions I got, for anyone that's curious, is the actual canvas size. Actually, this is not true. If you're working by... You should be working at 300 DPI, first of all. And it seems like the actual dimensions were something like 2036 by 3030. But I actually decided, you know what, it's kind of awkward for me to work at that resolution, so I upped it to 3988 by 6130, personally. So that's what I decided to work on. That way I could export it down if I needed to. Like, working at that resolution, it did eat up a lot of memory. Like, if you need to have a good-sized computer to be able to work on it this way. But in addition to that, the resolution also requires the use of borders. Like, there's a live area, which is what you're seeing me drawing on. That's like the white area that you can actually see on the screen, on the canvas. The little gray area is what is referred to as the trim area, or the trim size. And it's not something you really have to worry about too much, but if you're doing like prints, then the trim size would be the area which they actually can go across and trim for the sake of the borders for printing onto a page. And the black area is just the bleed area. That's just sort of a safety zone. So, if you're going to do anything for production, this goes for writing as well. If you're going to be doing anything for the sake of production, then you have to look at industry standards so that the companies that you might end up working with actually can work with you. Like, if you draw a comic and you finish it, and it turns out, oh, it isn't formatted properly whatsoever, then you just created a whole bunch of problems for really no reason at all. Whereas if you had done the research beforehand, then you would not have that issue at all. Same thing goes for writing, actually. There is a specific format to writing manuscripts that you had to follow, and whenever I was doing novels, I was having to do that as well. In that case, it comes down to... I can't go into the details of it, but you really need to look it up. But it comes down to how you space it, the fact that you have to split the page into two individual columns. It has to be, especially if you're doing like dramaturgy or something like that, it has to be formatted by character names. Like, it's very, very specific. Just before you get anything like that, research it beforehand. It'll make things a lot simpler in the long run, believe me. So, first off, whenever I was doing the comic, all that research had to be done first. And then after I actually got what the canvas and resolution sizes and everything needed to be, then I started to work on the writing. And with the writing, it was more of a matter of what do I want to accomplish with this. And to that end, I decided with the writing, there's a number of things I want to accomplish. It's one, I want there to be an uplifting message that is about trying to encourage young people to better themselves. And one thing that's prevalent, especially in American high schools, is that because of the way that the United States government legislates how to grade children, a lot of what is taught in high schools comes down to things like dates, information, the particulars of when something happened, who did it, just like trivia information, factoids, essentially. So you end up being graded on that. And really, that's not that important. For anyone that has ever been to university, been to college, I'd love to use history as a great example of this. In high school history, usually they'll get like gym teachers and stuff to teach history, because it's considered to be not that important for some reason, even though it's incredibly important. But in high school history, you get taught, like, Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, blah blah blah, and you get tested on what date did he invent this on. Stuff that no one remembers once they get out of high school, because it's not important. Like, historians, like, collegiate level historians famously will have just books where they actually have to look back up the dates of specific things they're talking about, because they don't really remember them unless they just use them all the time. Because they're not important. They just aren't. The actual content of what's important, you learn this more whenever you get into higher education, are things like, why did this happen in the first place? Like, why did World War I break out? And it's easy just to summarize it as, oh, this guy was driving in a car and he got shot because his driver, blah blah blah. And sure, that's true, but what's more important is, what was the environment like? What was the culture like? What were people thinking at the time? Why, like, if you go to World War II or whatever, why was Hitler the way that he was? Was there something medically wrong with him? Was it a culture thing? Like, you're looking at all these issues that are almost more psychological than they are about dates and history and so forth and so on. History is about understanding the subject. It's not even a subject. History is just about understanding why people are the way that they are, when it comes down to it. So, going from high school to collegiate, it's very jarring because suddenly you're exposed to what actually is important, and you're not being expected to learn dates and information anymore. It depends on your teacher, of course, and who's teaching. But typically, you learn very quickly, no, that doesn't matter. It just does not matter. That is not how you teach information. Because, again, the United States government legislates we need to have test scores that look like this. And we need to make sure that no one is left behind as far as education goes. All these policies that were introduced, especially back in the 90s, that were well-intentioned, ended up very much so hurting the American education system. So as a result, and this goes for schools before this happened as well, especially in America, and I know this is a problem worldwide as well, but a lot of the times, people are not educated on how to be adults. They're educated on information, dates, just useless information like that no one actually cares about. But they're never told, how do you buy a car? How do you, rent an apartment? How do you write a check isn't even taught these days. Just basic, everyday, how do I live as an adult questions. How do I just be happy as me, as an adult? What is life actually like outside of being a student? And that information is just never taught to kids. It just isn't. So, to me, whenever I think about, trying to encourage young people, which I've had to think more and more about as I get more and more into the YouTube thing. Because it's a very important subject. A lot of my demographic are young people that are either in middle school or high school, or they're leaving and going to college, and they're in that time frame in which they're very uncertain about what's going on. They don't know exactly what it is that they're doing, they don't know what they want to do, they're very fearful about the future, and they're made to feel like they're wrong for feeling that way, which is not the case whatsoever. It's a very problematic sort of thing in our culture that I feel like I could help with by telling a story like that. So, whenever I was planning the comic, I decided that's what I want to do. I want to have a comic that's specifically about that. And I just talked for probably, 10 minutes on that one subject? So whenever I was actually doing the writing, it became a big problem of how do I jam that much information into this tight of a space in only 6 pages. Plus, in addition to that, the other criteria I wanted is I have all these girls that I've designed. I need to make sure that I try to at least depict as many of them as I possibly can in as tight of a space as I can, while also establishing what their characters are, what they're like, what their personalities are, and so forth and so on. So, some of the more exuberant girls, like Moon or Yuri or someone like that, it's a bit easier to show what they're like just from a distance, just showing off their physical designs, because a lot of that does translate. So I wanted to make sure that I had at least 4 or 5 characters that are actually in discussion with one another, where you can actually get a trace on what their personalities are like. So I decided, well, what's the best way of doing this? What's the best way of showcasing as many characters as possible? And I thought, well, what if one of the characters was going through a problem, teacher was talking to her, and she decided the best way of trying to teach her a lesson about this subject was to just take her on a tour of the school that they are at, and just show off, this is what the other students are doing right now. That way, we can cover as much ground as possible in terms of the subject I wanted to approach. We can show off as many characters as we possibly can, and so forth and so on. So in terms of planning, that's what my approach was in the first place. I chose Nen because, one, she was very popular. Like, a lot of people really like Nin. Nin's the little Sphinx girl. She's the one with the little snake tail and so forth and so on. Kind of funny, because the original Manticore design no one really liked. Like, it was... barely anyone cared about it. But the redesigned version that I made to be more marketable specifically ended up being very, very marketable. I chose her because her personality sort of lent to it. The way that I designed her, she looks a bit more vulnerable. She doesn't really look like she's that much in control. She is a bit more cute looking. So I felt like her personality translated well to the sort of issue of a character that isn't quite sure what to do with themselves, that is... I was actually thinking a lot about myself whenever I was writing her. Because how I was whenever I was younger was... I had to go through a lot of emotional abuse whenever I was younger, like I was an unwanted child. I was born into a family that was incredibly impoverished, especially during drought era. We were farmers, in which we just didn't have any money, and there were already too many mouths to feed as a result. So, you know, some physical abuse, lots of emotional abuse, being told every day how useless and pathetic I was, how I will never amount to anything, and so forth and so on. Because my dad was just like that. He's just a very insecure, kind of dumb man. Like, I'm not trying to be mean or anything, he has limited intelligence. So, his way, like, I was his way of lashing out in many ways. So as a result, I grew up kind of just in a very shitty place of having no confidence, not really knowing anything about the world around me. We were very isolated, out in the middle of nowhere, so I didn't really have any friends or anything. Just everything that could go wrong with my upbringing was going wrong. And I don't think they even really realized what they were doing to me until I was, like, nearly out of high school. But anyways, I saw a lot of myself in that problem of... This feeling of being completely frozen. Well, that's how I was whenever I was younger. I sort of froze in place in terms of... I don't want to do anything, I just want to play video games. And it's not because I really wanted to play video games. It was because that was my outlet. Like, that was the one thing that I could do to just relax and be isolated, left alone, and just feel like I wasn't, interfering with anyone else's life, that I wasn't fucking anything up, so forth and so on. I didn't want to get my driver's license, I didn't want to get a job, I didn't want to go to college, I just didn't want anything. Like, everything was frozen with me. And that's a sign of depression and all sorts of other things. This is where the artist stuff comes from, by the way, if you couldn't tell. Of course, I'm like 30-something now, so all this is much, much further behind in my past these days, so don't worry too much about it. But point being, whenever I was writing that, that's what I was thinking about. This problem of how do you get out of that? And the answer is, it's confidence. Like, the only way of doing that is to just get away from the source of problems that you're having in the first place, which in my case, it was parents. And to just slowly build confidence over time, which is very difficult. You just have to have minor successes with everything. But the point of her character in this little comic was that she eventually decides for herself, you know, I don't have the confidence to be able to do what I should be doing, which I feel like I should be this person, but I am not this person. And the point of the comic was how do you get past that? And her answer was eventually, I don't know. But I think that I will just help the people that I actually feel like I can care about until I figure things out for myself. Which is the proper way of doing it. Because you can't fix that sort of problem overnight. You just can't. It just takes a lifetime of slowly building yourself up before you actually begin to actualize yourself as being an adult. And decide for yourself, this is the person that I want to be. So, that's what the comic was supposed to be about. The other characters are also there to sort of demonstrate other problems that they potentially had, like Kay, she's the Fox teacher. Her actual name is Kyungju, which she's not actually a Kitsune, she's a Kumiho, which I think I mentioned the other. I'm not going to go too much into it. But that's the name I eventually decided on her. I figured, well, that would be difficult for people to keep track of, so I'll call her K. Because the idea behind my setting... Actually, hold on, I should explain this real fast. What you're seeing right now in video is me doing individual pages. It's not going from first to last. Because then it would be like a... Even if I sped it up as fast as it is right now, it would still be like a 9-hour video or something. I have no idea. It would be very long. So what you're actually seeing here are the parts where I recorded myself doing various stages. First, it was the layout where I was drawing all the frames and doing the drafts. Then after that, I decided to do line. After this, I will start doing color. Then after that will be the shading phase. Then after that will be the text and bubble phase, where I'm going through and doing like touch-up work and everything else like that. So that's what you have to look forward to, I guess. So, in regards to the setting, when I was planning this out, now I can't go over all the various reasons why I chose the setting like that. This is just what I wanted. Whenever you're doing your own planning, that's kind of what it comes down to. Just a matter of what do you want, like what are the things that you like. So in this case, I decided I want a setting in which there are like monsters. And because the Monster Girl thing is popular and because I enjoy drawing the little monster women, I'll go with that. So I decided, well, what's a good place? Like, this is where the Ghoul School thing sort of comes from. I decided a good way of handling this is just there's an isolated place where I don't have to draw that much. Like, I can just draw woodland areas and have it be vague and not have to worry about it. Whereas if it was taking place in a city or something, it would be way more involved. You would either have to not have backgrounds at all, or I would have to draw a lot of geometry. I hate drawing geometry. Like, buildings, anything that's just a bunch of angles, like hard angles. Oh, I hate doing that. It drives me nuts. Absolutely despise every moment of doing that. So just being able to draw things that are completely organic made me way better, way more enjoyable. Plus, I've always liked the idea of something just being out in the woods, just completely isolated, free from people, like, harping on you, you know, just random assholes on the street just screaming or whatever. Just a nice, like, this is what the setting is supposed to convey. Just a nice, peaceful setting where you are isolated, where you can be yourself, you can learn to do whatever it is that you need to do. That's where it's coming from. So, with the girls, what I eventually decided on was the idea that this school was for, specifically, it was an all-women's school, and I thought, well, there could probably be like an all-boys school somewhere else, or it could be like different times of the year, or something like that. So I didn't focus too much on the logistics of that. But as far as like their biology and everything goes, like here this is from another page I'm using as reference material. As far as like how the setting is laid out, what I have sort of decided on is the idea that it is essentially the same setting as our world, except there are monster people, and there's not too many of them. Like they're not incredibly rare, but they're becoming a bit more common. So I decided maybe there was something like a couple of 100 years ago where there was some sort of reformation in which they became more accepted. So now it's a bit more common to see them just walking around, and there's not much racism left anymore. It's sort of like how modern racism is sort of Get Out racism, that movie, where it's more positive usually. Like it's more, oh, you're black, do you play basketball? You know, that sort of stupid thing. Where people think they're being actually nice and considerate, but they're actually being racist, just in a very awkward way that they don't realize. Like, that's actual racism, usually. There does exist the cartoonish sort, you know, but usually it's that sort. So with the monsters, I kind of imagine it's the same way, where they, like, might meet, like, this jackalope character and have some sort of asinine idea, oh, you eat a lot of carrots, or, you know, some other sort of racist thing like that. No, I eat the same thing you do, dumbass. So as far as that goes, like, I didn't want to focus too much on, like, race or anything like that. So that's where the idea of it being sort of a post-Reformation society came from, because I didn't want that to be the focus. I wanted to... The point of them being monsters was the fact that they are monsters, like, their character design, their behavior as, like, comical monsters, should be a reflection of things that actual people in real life actually go through. So with the Nin here. Nin, like, she has the cute little sort of snake tail, the wings, her hair is obscured, she's kind of cute looking, she's sort of shabbily dressed, but it's comfortable at the same time. But she's also sort of clinging to some idea of fashion. Like, all these things sort of coincide with the idea that she is a character that has a lot of things that sort of are emotional baggage. They're like this baggage to her. They're hanging on, but not too tightly. There's something that she can get rid of. They obstruct her everyday life, but they could also be used to great effect if she figures out how to do them. Like, all those traits can be attributed to a normal person. So the fact that she is a monster is just a narrative device to show those in a more literal way. So that's sort of more what I wanted to focus on. So if people start getting into, like, oh, they're a monster, so shouldn't they, like, do this? You know, shouldn't they have 6 nipples? The answer is no, because in my setting, all these characters, they might be monsters, but they're still human. Like, I'm using the logic that I used with my Sonder setting, which I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to get around to doing that. This is a much easier way for me to do this, by the way. To use a lot of those ideas, and this is actually working out much better because it's much easier to translate them. So, the idea there was everyone is human, but there's a thing called lethality and blah 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 blah, not important. With this setting, it's everyone is actually human, but things can happen, like, there's someone gets attacked by wolves at some point in, like, the ancient past. And the events are so traumatic that the person actually transforms into a werewolf or something. Like, I'm not sure what the exact reason. I'm just giving an idea off the top of my head. And that would be like the birth of all werewolves. And that person from that point forward, if they ever had any kids, there would be, like, a chance for their children to also carry that trait, in which they would also be born looking like a werewolf. Or they could be born looking like normal humans. Like, it just depends on what their, like, their fate, I guess, whatever it is. Like, maybe it's purely genetic, maybe it's... Like, I didn't want to get too much into it, but you get the idea. That it's more of a personality thing. And I thought, well, maybe it emerges around puberty. Like, maybe they start going through changes and they start turning into this at puberty. And I thought, well, I wouldn't really like that too much, because then that would focus too much on the strain of actually changing completely as a person. So I thought, well, it would be better if they were born that way. Like, all these considerations. But the gist of it is that there are different kinds of species of monsters, and almost all of them, actually, are just the descendants of original monsters that have been having kids with ordinary humans, because they also are genetically human. They're just... There's like a magic or a force or whatever have you, a narrative force in the setting that causes them to have the abilities that they have, that causes them to take on the appearance that they have. And here, this is where we start on the color, I guess. It seems like I forgot to start recording on this, and that's the reason why I started with her hair. Anyways, so you would have this sort of thing where, like, 10,000 years ago, there was, like, someone that the only person that they had in their life was, like, their mother or something. And they loved their mother, they barely had anyone else. Like, the world was very strange to them. But then, at some point, whenever they were very young, their mother died. And rather than leave the child alone, somehow, like, this narrative sort of force, this magic or whatever that's in this world, which is the only thing that really distinguishes it from ours, somehow allowed the mother to persist from that point forward. And, like, she became a ghost, like the first ghost that ever existed or something, because of this need of character for her to persist and become tangible beyond death. And from that point forward, maybe she went on and she had another kid, and that kid was born as well as having these sort of ghostly powers or whatever. But you get the idea. Like, it's sort of genetic. It's more of a lineage thing of... It's something you can... Like, your family can lose over time. Like, if you're a certain amount of generations separated from, like, your werewolf ancestors or whatever, then maybe there's, like, eventually zero chance of your kids being werewolves or whatever. But point being, like, it's just a narrative device. And that's how monsters sort of originate in this setting. That there's a story behind all of them. Like, werewolves came from this. Ghosts came from this experience. Like, everything comes down to that. Like, there was some sort of horrible thing that happened to someone, and they became this as a result. Like, they were actually transformed into monsters because of the change that their personality had to go through. And being labeled as being a monster... Like, again, their physical appearance is a reflection of their character. The fact that they are monsters, that they have this problem in their personality or whatever, does not necessarily mean that they are, like, literal monsters. It can just mean that who they are, the problems that they have to go through, are more visible to the people around them. So that's what the setting is trying to accomplish, as far as my design goes. Is I'm trying to make sure that what they have to experience is visual. And also to make sure that any of the readers, like any kids reading it, know that just because your problems might be visible doesn't mean that you are wrong, or that what you're going through should be something you should be ashamed of or anything. Because there are a lot of people like this. And just because you can't see it in other people doesn't mean they're not also going through the same exact problems. It's just that with the monsters, you can visually see it. That's it. I was thinking more about, like, where does this come from? Like this magic in the world, where's it coming from? And I was thinking, you know, there might be something where I hint at it. Maybe there's an island that they reference sometimes. It's out in the middle of the Pacific, but barely anyone ever mentions it because it's just this place. And like I was, that idea sort of came from Made in the Abyss while I was mucking about with that. Just the idea of that there's this isolated place in the world there's this one thing that geologically is different, and that's just a hint at what it is. And there would never be the actual explanation, just a hint of something happened here, and we're not sure what it is. And the characters in the universe don't really address it either, because it's not that important, because they consider this monstrous thing that they go through to be a part of everyday life in the first place. Yeah, that's my line of thought with it. Not something that should be taken as being canon or whatever have you. But more importantly, all that is just, like, background information, because the actual content of any stories that I would make would primarily just be about this. Just the girls, everyday life, people being people, kids being kids, young adults trying to become older adults, so forth and so on. This is why I designed the setting this way. Like, this is why everything is the way that it is, as far as my setting ideas go. To explain all that. So, when it comes to things like character arcs and things like that, I can imagine all these characters improving. I'm sure you might be wondering things like, well, do they... Like, can they stop being monsters if they improve as people or whatever? I've said this before. You don't want to put the cart before the horse. I usually use Star Wars as a good example of this. Where originally, in the original movies, the Force was just the Force. It was just a narrative device that is meant to be a reflection of your personality. Like, there was not any sort of genealogy behind it where, oh, my father was strong in the Force, therefore I am. The implication I got from the original films was more that you were just a special person. Like, the way that you think, the way that you approach life, is unique in that it allows you to sort of see into the folds of what it means for things to be real or not real. And you're actually able to tap into what composes starting to have problems talking. Goodness. That you can start to sort of see through the world and take control of it. It wasn't like genetic or anything. But eventually the story stopped being about that, and it became more of a video game. Gosh, I feel like I had something in my throat. It became far more of a video game where, there's Sith, there's Jedi. You get these power sets. This is where it comes from. If you are a Sith, you have a red lightsaber. If you're Jedi, you get a green or a blue one usually. And it became more about the actual... time travel is another good example of this. And I've ranted about this before. Of a good time travel story just uses time travel as the basis for an actual story about characters. And I think I mentioned this in the live commentary track that we did for First Contact, Star Trek First Contact. I was talking about how a great example of time travel in Star Trek would be whenever Picard is whisked back in time by Q and said, alright, here's you whenever you were much younger, like whenever you were a young adult. The thing that got you killed, this is the premise, Picard gets killed, he's killed. He's on the operating table and he's dying. His artificial heart that he has is failing. And he has an artificial heart because whenever he was younger, he got into a stupid bar fight with some angry Nausicaans, and he got stabbed through the back, right through his heart, which necessitated him having an artificial one installed. So, Q offers him this chance of, I will allow you to survive. You have to go back in time, and as the man that you used to be, make the decision to not get involved. And so he does that. Picard intentionally, tells his friend that he was defending, you don't need to get involved with these Nausicaans. Don't be a fool. Don't be reckless. And he survives the fight. He survives with his heart intact. He doesn't go through that trauma. And as a result, he... in the future, he ends up becoming this very safe, low-grade guy. He's serving on the Enterprise, but he's not the captain at all. He's, this nobody. No one knows who he is. They kind of barely notice that he's there. He's just no one. So eventually the point of that story is he tells Q, I would rather die as the person that I was than be this shell of a man that never took any risks at all in life. And that's the lesson of that story. It wasn't about time travel. It was about him as a character, and it just used time travel, whether it's, space or magic time travel or actual technology time travel, whatever, to tell a story. And they sort of did that in some of the movies too, going back in time to get the stupid fucking whale or anything. It wasn't about that. It was about the characters looking back on what was then contemporary history, right? So that's an example of good time travel. Bad time travel is whenever you start getting obsessed with the time travel itself. How does it work? What's the machine do? Whenever you go back in time, does it alter these events? Does it create branching timelines? And you start focusing really heavily on that element of it? You're focusing too much on the wrong things. At that point, you have completely lost track of what the point of storytelling even is, and you're focusing on the rules and the sort of technology behind everything, rather than what is actually important, and that is the characters. So, in regards to my setting, that's kind of what I'm thinking about in regards to, if you're wondering, what happens whenever they do this? Are they still monsters, or can they become worse versions of monsters? What happens whenever one monster marries another monster? Do they get, one that has two traits? And the answer to that, by the way, is yes. I can imagine that's where Nen came from. She's probably the result of, her family heritage. At some point, there was probably, a monster that there's like a snake or something of that nature, maybe like a lamia, and it married into a family of like some sort of lion-themed monsters of some sort. And maybe that's where that came from. Or maybe it was something that was completely new. Like, maybe it wasn't that. Maybe her family line came from just the idea of things fusing together for some reason. Like, there was some sort of story that you could tell that relates to that specifically. It just depends on what you want to do, what kind of story that you want to tell. I don't really... Personally, my idea behind things like that is you never want to specify things too hard. Like, you don't want to say this... Like, werewolves came from this one guy, and nothing else. It's better to say that this specific family of werewolves came from this one thing, but it's also possible they may have come from this other thing. Like, don't set anything in stone, because if you set anything in stone, you're removing the potential for other ideas that might come later. Like, you never want to do that. But anyways, point being, you need to focus more on characters. If you don't do that, you're doing a disservice. You don't want to focus too much on the mechanics of why everything is the way that it is, because that is not the point. So whenever I'm approaching the storytelling, that's where I'm coming from. So if you have any questions about the monsters, I might be able to answer them. I might have some loose ideas about it. But in general, I'll probably be more focused on why the girls are the way that they are, what they're thinking, what they went through, what their personal lives were like. Not so much the mysterious island in the middle of the Pacific that may or may not be the cause of all sources of magic in this world, or whatever it is. It's not really that important. But it is kind of a cute idea to bandy about ever so often. That's kind of my approach to it, as far as storytelling goes. Setting storytelling, anyways. So, at this point, we have... What page is this? This is page 4. Like, we started on page 5, actually. And that was one where I was showing off the line work and everything else. Now we're at page 4. This is where we're doing the shading. A lot of people say that this is a very detailed comic. It really isn't. Like an actual, like a professional comic made by like Marvel or DC or something, obviously is going to be a lot more involved than this, that's for sure. I kind of feel bad for people like that. There's no way I could do that sort of work. Like, even doing this was killing me. I started in November, I think. Actually, let me check a date real fast. I started on November 11th, actually. That was whenever I first created the Scary Lessons comic number 1 PSD. November 11th. And I got done on Christmas Eve, actually. That's how long it took. Took well over a month to get all this done. But I wanted to do a project like this at least once. Mainly to show it off. It kind of gave me some other ideas. Like, one thing that I'm having to start to worry about as I get older. Like, I'm 35. I'm 35 now. But as I get older, like, I can't just do this and nothing else for the rest of my life, right? Not because I can't, but because I would like to accomplish more things as I get older, right? Like, this is something you start thinking about the more and more you get older. And usually that's something more for middle-aged people, but I don't want to wait that long. I don't want to get to a point where I'm, like, unmarried, like, 55 years old or something, still trying to make YouTube animations. Like, I want to expand, grow as a person, and become new things, and do new things. And, to that end, like, using things like this, I think I could go some places with this. I'm not sure what I would do with it, though. But one thing that I was thinking about, which actually, this is spurred by Doki Doki Literature Club. It came out sort of recently, and it's not like that's an amazing game or anything. But I was thinking, having like a little visual novel sort of game is something that could be reasonable for this sort of story and setting. So I thought I would like to be able to do something like that. Maybe not like a dating game or anything, but, just a game about relationships where, sure, maybe there's like a dating thing part of it. I don't know. it doesn't really matter to me. But it's more about the direction of the girls, you know, meeting them, getting to know them, kind of just inhabiting this world and that sort of thing. You can tell I haven't given a huge amount of thought to the actual story, what such a thing would be. I just had the loose idea of this sort of format. And I thought it'd be nice if I could actually get something like that done, and then, like, just put it out on Steam for free. You know, just no money or anything, maybe have, like... That's the reason why I kind of had that idea, because Doki Doki did the same thing. They put it out for free. I think they're doing it because they are advertising viral marketing for something else that they're making. I think that's the reason why they put it out for free. But with me, I would just want it to be free because I'm me. But Doki Doki actually has, I think on Steam, they have like a peripheral sort of pack that's like the music of the game and maybe like some concept art and things. Thought, I could do like a donation thing where there's like a quote-unquote DLC for the game that's, well, the game's free, you could just have like some background information and basically use it as like a tip jar, I guess. That's a loose idea that I was sort of working with. It also would make a nice little cartoon, but that's way more involved, and I would never be able to do that. Simply because I have no experience working in that industry, I don't know the first thing about it. I wouldn't want to move, I wouldn't want to make a pitch like that. Like, it's just too far for me. Like, this too much of an increment. I wouldn't know the first thing about it. I would end up having my IP seized, controlled, and probably taken away from me before I knew it. Like, that's too cutthroat. But I thought the visual novel sounds like a cute way of doing it. That'd be a fun way to sort of get out a message of trying to help young people without worrying too much about money or time. But even something like that, doing a visual novel like that is, like, doing like, this took a month and a half. Just these little comics, and that's all it was. And I don't know the first thing about... Well, I do know the first thing. I used to do some scripting. I didn't really do any coding, but I do have, like, a minor history in scripting. I wouldn't be any good at it, though. I was never a very elegant scripter in the first place. I always had way too many lines of syntax. Like, it's just a mess whenever I did it. But point being, I would need help. And I don't even know where to start with that. And so it would probably have to be something where I have to pay other people money to be able to deal with it. And I don't even know if I would have the time... I don't even know if I would have the time to draw the images that you would have to use for it. Like, someone else could handle the backgrounds because I'm not amazing at backgrounds in the first place. I get too frustrated with them and I try to hurry too much through it. I could do, like, rough drafts of the characters and have someone else do the line work, but I'm not sure if they would be able to handle it correctly. The color theory of the game might be something I might have to work with exclusively. I don't know if someone else could handle that. I just don't know. Like, I've worried about that with the animation, too. I originally had the idea of, well, maybe I'll do, like, some drafts of animations and then hand them off to an actual studio and have them do some of my animations for me. But then I thought, well, a lot of the point is that I'm the one doing them. I don't want it to be something where I'm, like, putting off other people's work that they worked hard on and putting it under my label or anything like that. So I was kind of worried about that. Plus, I don't know who to contact. I haven't really put out any feelers in regards to that or anything like that. And there's a lot of logistic stuff that I just detest having to worry about. But that's what I would have to do in order to get around it. So, when it comes down to it, I really enjoy just drawing cute little pictures of little furry women. So when it gets more into the business of worrying about, like, these more business-related things, that really worries the shit out of me. It's not something I would really want to have to deal with. But eventually one day it's something I'll probably have to do. With, like, doing the Sandra project stuff, I think that it's probably so much work that I don't know if I'll ever be able to translate it into anything. The ideas are there, and I think even those ideas can be translated into something like this project. But you get where I'm coming from with this. It's just very complicated. It's a very adult problem to have. And even like me, you might say, oh, a plague has things together. Maybe not. Because when it comes to stuff like this, it's probably simple for other people, but for me, it's a big complication. But it is a step forward in regards to me developing myself as a person, and it's very difficult to do. Especially whenever you're alone and you don't really have any help or encouragement or anything like that. That's probably the worst thing. One of the lines in this, actually, that we'll get to a little bit later, probably, is... There's a line later on that Kay says, and it's something like... Actually, I can just pull it up. I don't know why I'm even doing it this way. But she's talking about the necessity of, like, what you need in order to develop as a person. And if I can find it... I think it's on page 3. She says that... Well, she says, if you want to get better at anything, you have to be able to enjoy being bad at it, which is something, if you watch my videos, I harp on that a lot. And you can't gain confidence without enjoying a failure. I also harp on that a lot. I'm glad that a lot of people touched on that and said that helped them a lot. That's good. But she says that Nen says, how do you enjoy failing in public? Because, again, she's the character that has problems with her confidence, that has problems with security. Like, she's like me whenever I was younger. She just doesn't want to make herself vulnerable to the people around her because she's too used to being abused by other people. And Kay says, that was my problem too. Because her problem was her mother. She says, bad friends, stressed out parents, they can destroy your confidence without realizing it. We can't guarantee good people around us. We can only try to be better ourselves. And... Well, she further goes on to say that's why it's important to have good teachers, friends who know it's okay to fail and who will help you, and a parent who is an over-demanding psycho who wants to turn you to something that they failed at becoming themselves. But I had, like, at least one person say, oh, so the trick is just to be surrounded with good people. You know, and your point is, that's not fair, right? No, it's not fair at all. If you're a kid that's raised in, like, a violent, war-torn African country or something, and you're surrounded by people that are shooting each other, killing each other, you might wonder, well, how are they supposed to grow up to be a normal person in that environment? And the answer is they don't. That's why it's important for you, if you have the opportunity, to be a good person yourself. Because your actions affect everyone around you. Now, it's not going to be as exaggerated as you being an African warlord, obviously. I don't think most people listening to this video are probably going to have to worry about something like that. But who you are as a person is also a reflection of the things that you've had to go through whenever you were younger and as you were growing up. So often that's the reason why I have a lot of tolerance. Like, there's been a few people in my Discord that they cause problems for everyone else. And I have tolerated them as much as I possibly can tolerate them. Because I know what that is like. And I had to explain this to someone recently. Like, why do you keep them around? And my answer was, well, I just know what that's like. I know that it's a struggle, and that sometimes your behavior is more of a reflection of a shitty life that you've had to go through, rather than being a reflection of you, right? And I know over time, they will eventually get through that. So the only time I really ban someone is whenever they just get to be such a problem that they're actually... Like, I feel like, sure, they'll move past it one day, but that's going to be years from now. And they're actively harming too many things right now for everyone else, so I just gotta get rid of them. Like, it's never malicious with me. I always want to give people a chance. I don't know why I got on that subject, I can't remember. But point being, people go through a lot of shit. Oh, right. So your environment can actually very negatively affect who you are and who you can potentially be. But never use that as an excuse. Like, I am the way that I am because I was, like, emotionally and sometimes physically abused whenever I was growing up. And I went through a lot of shit and generally did not have a very happy life. I was very depressed all the time. Didn't have any stable relationships as a result. That's the reason why I'm alone now. Like these days, I just like being alone for the most part, and it would take meeting someone incredibly special for me to consider not being alone. So now I'm very choosy these days as far as like partners and everything goes. But that's the reason why I'm alone now. It's just because of that reason. Because I just got used to being alone for so long that now it's just normal to me, which is fine. Like, that's not a complaint or anything. This is who I ended up becoming as a result. So it did affect me. But I can't use that really as an like, if I actually was like, oh, I'm so alone and pitiful. Like, if I actually was like really concerned about it, then I should expect myself as an adult to go out and do something about it, right? But I'm not that concerned about it, so I don't. So, but you don't ever like just put the blame on everyone else. You also have a responsibility mainly to yourself to be a better person. So that is valid. Whenever someone complains, oh, you just need to be surrounded with good people. Yeah, you do. And sometimes, this is the reason why I have a lot of tolerance for kids being this way, as awful as kids can be. If you have a shitty, snot-nosed kid, he's probably that way for a reason. And he can't leave home. Like, if he's 14 or whatever, and he's still growing up, what does that kid do? Like, what could they possibly do? They can't go get a job and get rid of the toxic people that are, like, ruining their life or anything like that. It's just something that they have to deal with until they're old enough to support themselves. And if their parents aren't raising them correctly, and they're not preparing them for that eventual life of being an adult, and they don't know how to go about doing it, they can end up like me, where they're just frozen, and they don't know what to do. They just want to be left alone, because that's all they know. Just staying out of the way. Because they feel like they're completely incapable of doing anything. So sometimes, yeah, it's not fair. Life is not fair like that. It's not a video game where you get to balance it the right way. Sometimes people just get a shit life and they grow up around shit people, and that shitty culture just makes it more of a problem for them to actualize themselves and be better people as a result. Like, the same thing sort of happens to a lesser extent with people that get married too early. They may... Like, one of the main driving forces for a lot of people is, oh, I need to improve myself so I can be more obtainable. Like, I'm more someone that would be desired by the opposite sex if I embetter myself in various ways. And a lot of, like, young people specifically will go through that, get to the point where they meet someone, fall in love, get married, and then they just let themselves go. Like, physically, they get, overweight, they like, sure, there's physical elements of it. They don't exercise anymore or whatever. But there's also other negative effects that sometimes people will just not improve as people at all. They don't try to, like, get better jobs. They don't try to, like, learn new skills. They don't, more importantly, try to improve themselves as people and, like, behave better around other people. They will just continue to be the same shitty people forever because, hey, they're already married, right? So that's sort of one reason why a lot of divorces happen as well, is that sort of core problem of people lack the initiative for self-improvement in many cases. So the impetus for actually improving yourself as someone, a lot of the times can come down to simply not having a very good life. Now, if you consider, whatever you think of me, if you consider me to be an uplifting person or whatever, which some people have said is like the result of a comment like this, like I have other problems as well, but some of the impetus for why I haven't improved as a person is because I had a crummy life. I haven't gotten support from anyone. I don't have a wife in my ear saying, no, you're good now, you don't need to worry about that. Just like the overly positive encouragement can also be detrimental. So you can actually utilize the negatives of your life to actually better yourself as a result. And that's, I feel like a lot of what happened with me is just, I'm so down on myself in regards to my own improvement, or especially I used to be, these days it's not quite as bad, that I use that as my reason for why I should be a better person. Like, I should... Like, you would not recognize me whenever I was... Like, even, like, in my mid-20s. Like, the Plague of Gripes thing, the terminology for it. You know, I complain about things, obviously. In my case, especially these days, it's more of a matter of critiquing more than it is anything else. But a lot of that stems from whenever I was younger. I was very sarcastic, extremely irreverent, to the point of it being toxic. Like, every single thing that I said was always some sort of snarky comment that was meant to belittle other people, because that's just how I was. Like, it was just shitty. Okay, so, anyway, the point being, all of this culminating into what we have now, the Scary Lessons comic. I wanted to make a comic about self-improvement, about being a better person, about trying to learn to actualize yourself and figure out what it means to actually enjoy being an adult. Because schools don't teach that. And I feel like that's a big hole in people's lives for a lot of young people. It was for me. So that's something that I wanted to try to help with. So, when it comes to the comic, I think there's some things that I did well, some things I didn't do too great. One of the problems that I had was, usually I like subversive storytelling, like the opening I did for the Shitstorm that everyone loved is an example of that, where you barely say anything, but it's there, and there's a story there, and it's more mystifying than... Like, that's what I prefer. But with this, I had such a direction in terms of what the information that I wanted to deliver. It ended up being very, very verbose. Like, way too much for what I wanted. So as a result, there's a lot of speech bubbles. Like, they're just covering the pages in some places. Like, I'm not very experienced in making comics. This is just for the sake of showing you, like, this is how I did it. So maybe if you have your own ideas, you can go in another direction. So when it... Hold on. So when it comes down to the comic, I'm trying to make a PSD folder so I don't have to scroll through them. Sorry, I should have done that beforehand. Okay. So when it comes to the comic, I feel like that there was a little bit too much visual clutter. Some elements, I think... Like, I really wish that it'd been a little bit more subversive, because I think it's important for people to, like, glean information to learn things from their own internal line of thought, rather than it being verbally told to you, which I think is a failure of this comic, but I wanted to make sure that it was there. Like, I didn't want to leave anything to chance in regards to that, so... This is the final result. This is what I'm getting at. I'll go over the characters real fast. There's actually some background characters. No, I think just one, really. There was Talipo was the very first character that shows up in the first page at the very top. She's doing some garden keeping, I guess. I said I thought it would be funny if she was not actually the gardener. She's just a local girl that sort of just was there. My idea for this was that it's in sort of a isolated, mountainous, but also very like foliage heavy area. So either, like, my idea was that it takes place in like someplace in Kentucky, because that's just what I know, or it could take place in like the Rockies or something like that, I suppose, as well. Although the Rockies, I don't know if there would be anywhere near this amount of tree coverage, though. Probably in some places. It just depends. I'm not going to go into geological patterns. What am I thinking? Anyways, Talipo is up there at top. Nan, I hope you liked her. The snake is named Nan, if that was confusing you. Nanners, Bonanza. Kei Kyungju, the Kumiho. She is Korean. The other idea that I didn't explain to this is that all the characters are American in my head. Like, I don't want to specify that too much, but it just makes it easier for me since I'm American. So they're all like F2s or F3s. They're like second generation or third generation Americans. So things like Marin, even though I consider her to be sort of either Spanish or like Mexican, probably more, in heritage, I didn't want to have to bother rolling her R's or anything like that. So I thought it'll be easier for her if she was more integrated with modern American culture. That just makes things way more easy. So Nen, Kei, and then we have the vampire, Kiara. She is basically Sibella, except much redesigned to the point that a lot of people don't even recognize her. Raha, who of course is the jackal girl. Penny is the other teacher. My idea with her is that she would be like a pixie or a fairy, and she's more English-based. Like, all of them come from their own respective countries. Because I wanted it to be sort of international and have the flair of it being like monsters from everywhere, to try to make sure that it's all inclusive. In addition to that, Moon, the moth girl, and of course the sheet ghost that everyone is in love with, Ashlyn. I decided that she is Irish in origin, and probably more of a banshee. But I didn't want to specify that too much, but my idea is that she is a sheet ghost, and that's her thing, but, you know, you get the idea. And the redesigned Phantasma, I didn't really redesign her too much, but she's so far off model from her original, like, Ghoul School version that I thought, well, maybe it'll be okay. If I ever wanted to do something like pitch it to, I don't know, pitch at the Cartoon Network or Disney or some weird thing, Warner Brothers would throw a fit, because Warner Brothers is just insane with lust for IP protection. But I think that the design is far enough away that it wouldn't really matter, but it would be easy enough to drop her, I guess, if it came to that. I renamed her Yuri, by the way. I decided that she was a Japanese ghost of some kind. I didn't really like having two different ghosts, but I thought, well, people will get angry if she's not there, so I'll include her, just to have her there. The teacher here, Sanura, I decided that she was South African. She could not be. She could be something else, but I wanted to make sure that she was from a different continent. And I wanted to have as much diversity as possible, because I just like that. She is human. She's just completely human. There's not a single drop of monster blood in her. I like her design. I haven't developed, like, since they're side characters, I haven't developed their personalities too much. Just right now, I know that she just really likes music. She enjoys being a teacher. I imagine she's a much more serious person than Kei is, certainly. And of course, the last two characters are Winry, who is just Winnie, basically, who's become so far removed from design. Like, that's just a protection thing, like a legal thing, in case it ever came to it. Just to get people used to it, and to distinguish my character from everyone else's, I guess. I thought up all sorts of different names for her. Like, Winnie is a really cute name. You can tell, like, the Hotel Transylvania, like, werewolf girl is also named Winnie. So you can tell that people just... Winnie the werewolf. And it's cute sounding because it has an E sound on the end of it. So Winry's just as close as I could get to it while retaining everything that I needed it to. And of course, Marin, the jackalope girl. I feel like most of their personalities came through well enough, even if they didn't have any dialogue at all. So... Hopefully the message translated well enough. There was like one or two little mistakes that I had here and there, but it's not that big of a deal. Hopefully it wasn't too verbose, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I guess let me know what you think about the possibility of carrying this forward in the future, whether you're interested in the idea of the setting, what I could potentially do with it. Maybe even if you have experience doing visual novels or something, if you have any ideas on that. Sure, why not? But most importantly, I hope that you actually got a positive message out of the comic, because that's what I was really more aiming for. This was an interesting project to take on. It occupied a lot of time. I'm sorry I couldn't do an animation this month or anything like that as a result. I have a backlog of stuff I have to do now as a result of working on this comic, but I felt like it was worth the time. So hopefully this video and the comic was some help to you. You can find a link to the actual comic in the description, of course. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I don't know if I'll do something like this again in the future, but I enjoyed doing it, so if I can do it without it occupying too much time, because even if it just takes a month, that feels like an eternity to me as far as getting material out the door for you guys to consume. So, have a good life, I guess. Try to better yourselves as people, not because that's what is expected of you, but because you actually enjoy it. That's the best way to improve yourself. Just expose yourself to lots of new ideas, lots of new experiences, until you can figure out something that you enjoy that you never knew existed. Like, that's the point. That's the secret to being a better person. Just learning new things and having everything translate into new experiences. And being a better person to the people around you. That's what's important most of all. And that's the scary lesson. That's the reason why I named it this way. Because the scary lesson is not necessarily because they're monsters, it's because they're young people growing up, and those lessons can be very scary. Alright, thanks guys, I will see you next time.